to come to Days of Reparations to African people, because this is a place where I think that we have to recognize, white people have to recognize, you know, exactly what the African community is calling on you to do, and where you need to be in order to not just be an ally, but you can actually be a contribute materially to what African people are asking. And so I just really appreciate the USM organizers for inviting me to be a keynote here. And I also wanted to really appreciate the members of the party who are in Philadelphia as well, and the members of the movement who are in Philadelphia as well. And you know, I think that, you know, the African, I really want to just give, you know, we've been saluting people all night, so I'm not going to stop. The leadership of the African People's Socialist Party Chairman Omali Eshatala, I mean, his influence cannot be understated, because not only has he opened up an opportunity for white people to come in and join humanity, but he's also opened it up for African people to learn how to build and win in our communities and across the world, how we should be organizing, and practically what we can do when we organize. And we saw it right here in St. Louis, what has happened when African people, poor working class African people, when white people who are paying reparations contributed to the rehabilitation of the building and buildings across St. Louis in order for that to contribute toward the benefit African people, from prisons to workforce to gardens and vending and economic development, and just having a space to be on the north side of St. Louis is really incredible. And what Penny just said is not an understatement. I've been in St. Louis since we've been working there, and the conditions, the buildings, oh man, it's really like most, on every block there's some house. I mean, there might be 2 or 3 houses, or the whole entire block that has a house that's deteriorating and dilapidated. And of course the city continues to keep it like that as a way to move in white developers to take this. And what we're doing is we're making that community black. We're bringing in, we're telling any African who got any resources whatsoever, they should come in and buy a house and fix it up. Because you can buy a house for like $20,000 there, you know, a ready-made house and move in and pay $100-something in mortgage. And I think that's really significant, because not only can we do that there, we can do that in Philly, we can do that in Baltimore, and everywhere that we see our communities being taken over and used as a way to push poor working class African people out. Because we have, if we just sit down and think about it, we can have, you know, these resources to ourselves. We can work to make that happen. And I really just also want to just really say again around, you know, USM, African People's Solidarity Committee, and the leadership of Chairwoman Penny Hess, who, you know, she's been, you know, any African person can tell you, when you come to an event with the Uhuru movement, you see white people, you're like, okay. You know, like you automatically are a little distrustful, maybe a lot distrustful, because we have never had an opportunity. I mean, what we've been told is that, you know, white people come and they undermine our work, and they are agents and state. And, you know, when I first came into the work, I was just like, wow, these white people here, why are they here? They're spying on us. And in reality, like, but when you actually sit down and listen to African internationalism come through the mouth of white people, and not only just listen to it, but actually see exactly what they're doing to prove that they should be a part of humanity, to prove that they are really about black power and power in the hands of the African working class. This is the significance and the strategy of the party in action. And I just want to say that really is a unique characteristic that can't be duplicated. Because we hear often about white people being allies, and you know, there's a lot of allied white people out here in this world. And being in Washington, D.C., I'm in the city of allyship and white left and liberalism, and how they see themselves in relation to all of the issues that are going on in the world. And they actually get to define in those places how people take on these questions. So we just had a Black is Back coalition march in Washington, D.C. We're talking about AFRICOM and militarism in Africa, secret wars in Africa, but also how that relates to militarism and secret wars in the United States and everywhere else. How Minnesota is in Haiti and different places around the world where all this death and destruction is being carried out by U.S. imperialism. And there was no white organization in there, except for USM and the APSC, right? Because just a week or so beforehand, there was this women's march on the Pentagon. And they were talking about the same thing. We actually went there, and what we were told, what we experienced is that these white people closed ranks on us. They didn't want to hear about the BIB march and rally that we were having. They wanted to define for themselves what people should be concerned about. And the white left there is only concerned about really bringing people into this rank so that they can go ahead and use and still work on, still sit on the pedestal of our oppression. And so that's why USM APSC is so significant in the white community, so that we can actually draw out the people who claim to be about solidarity with African people and actually put it to the test. Okay, you're about solidarity, people? Go into the white community and go collect reparations and bring it on back. If you can't do that, you're really not about solidarity. If you can't really call to question this whole question of like parasitic capitalism and really challenge your white family, your white friends around this issue, then really you're not about solidarity. There was this one kid who was in DC area, and I believe he came into solidarity. I was told that that he had a whole bunch of black friends, and he couldn't go to his white family and talk about solidarity. It's kind of, he was real shy about that stuff. But he can go into the black circle of black people and talk about like racism and all that stuff, because he felt comfortable. But what really challenged, what we were really calling on him to do, what USM was really calling on him to do, is no. It's not okay for you to operate in the shadows of black people and believe that you yourself can adopt this moniker of oppression because you're around them. If you have a challenge, you are a white person. You need to go to your family. You need to go to your community coffee shops and all this that you don't want to go to. And you got to challenge yourself and challenge other white people to pay reparations and organize around this issue. He couldn't do it. That's why he's not here. And we're good. Because he's not part of it. But USM is growing. Every place that it goes, we see white people who unite with African internationalism, unite with the call of the people of the oppressed people of the world. And this is the stance that white people have to take, and they're taking it on, and they're growing in leaps and bounds. And I just really appreciate that work, because Chairman says, what are we going to do with the white people? And some organizations I say, let's kill them all off, let's throw them in the water. But there's a way that they can be redeemed, and their redemption is through the practical, material, solidarity work that is happening on a day-to-day basis, and is reflected in the institutions, is reflected in the growth and the leadership of Chairwoman Penny Hess and Jesse Neffel. About, I just really get upset because here we have this solidarity movement within the Uhuru movement, and I think that USM did a really great job. I forget the guy's name, the white guy who does these, Tim Wise, yes. Tim Wise is this white guy. Who knows who Tim Wise is? Nobody knows him. So Tim Wise is this white guy who for years has been on the education circuit, giving presentations about how you can unlearn racism and really feel the struggle of black people. He gets paid, thousands of dollars just to present. And none of that money comes back to the African community. It goes into his pocket. So he uses the exploitation, the suffering of black people to make himself richer. And then when USM, I'll let Jesse, if Jesse wants to say something more about that when he comes up there, when USM challenged him directly, he just couldn't deal with it. He would still not pay reparations, even though he was using our pain, our struggle, our death, our oppression to line his pockets. And that's what we say about material solidarity. That it's not enough to go over here and make workshops and make white girls cry because they had to challenge their own racism. As soon as they, I forgot this other white woman, she's an older woman.
Yeah, I can't think of her name,
there's these, and my point is that these are the popular videos that are on social media. People see this and like, oh my gosh, she made that white girl cry. And, oh yeah, Tim Wise has all this, knowledge and information, right? But nothing that they are doing compares to what we are calling on white people to do. And I can't even reiterate it enough. Like, we are distrustful of white people because white people always talk shit. white people always challenging our shit, and they don't never do nothing for African people. And they don't never do nothing that we ask them to do for Africa, which is a more important word, right? So the party says, in order for you to be a part of USM, in order for you to be a part of the African People Solidarity Committee, you gotta do X, Y, and Z. And if you can't do that, that means you're an enemy. You need to get out of here. And USM and APSC will actually challenge you and kick you out as well. So there are things that you have to do in order to make this work happen. And so it's really great to just see the significance and just the way that this is catching on like wildfire in the white community, because we don't want to throw you in the water. Not all of you. We actually want to be a part of. We want to create a new world. But we are all free from oppression. And we want everybody to function and live in that world. But we don't want any enemies to African people that live in that world. And we want to make sure that the same way that U.S. imperialism, parasitic capitalism is organizing and closing its ranks, making recruiting black people into their ranks, we are recruiting the white face of the Black Revolution through USM and APSC. So a little bit about me. As was already alluded to, I'm a daughter of parents who are from the Caribbean by way of Africa. And when we talk about colonialism and parasitic capitalism, it's really fresh there, right? I have my grandmother I'm first generation born here. My parents were actually born in Jamaica. My mother was born in Jamaica. With a sugar plantation, you still living in poverty, and the majority of the island is actually a free zone where there are companies who actually say this part of Jamaica is the United States, and you have all these factories that are there, and people who walk into the factories are now on U.S. property, and they are there creating products for U.S. companies and manufacturing for U.S. companies. In the meantime, we have Africans, a majority of Africans on the island of Jamaica who are living in such deprivation and poverty. And this is not just, but what we see on TV is, one love, come to Jamaica, man, and just what's the word? A paradise for tourists to come and frolic. Meanwhile, when they go to these places, they go to hotels, there's black African people who are serving them in these costumes in some cases that look like they're on a plantation, to make sure that your life is doing well there, and they want to protect you from all the bad people who are out in the world who actually want to come into these institutions, these businesses, and take every single thing back. And they have a right to be scared when they're there and they're trying to go off campus, because yes, there is shoppers in the street who actually want to take everything that you have. And when you think about like all the poverty that is there, it rivals many places on the continent of Africa and many places here in the United States that really, that sees that this kind of poverty has happened. And in Grenada, where my people are from, my father's people are from, Grenada has a really special place in my heart, because that's where the Grenada Revolution happened. Maurice Bishop, one of the greatest revolutionary leaders in the Caribbean, really took hold of the country, took over, and was actually challenging this whole question of the U.S. imperialism and the domination that it has over the Caribbean islands. And it was at a time where there were so many people who were, it was actually in the 80s, but it was after this whole question of like colonialism was being shed or being, granted or ungranted from these islands. And here we have a revolutionary people's organization in Grenada who said we don't want none of this capitalism and colonialism here. And they started doing programs to address women's questions and having programs to build the infrastructure. And the U.S. Army was like, nah, because they were a threat. Grenada was a threat, because they could speak English. And they actually wrote this out, that Grenada is more of a threat than Cuba in some ways, and other places that don't speak English, because they can speak English when they're talking that revolutionary shit. So they can communicate to the black people in the United States, and they didn't want that. And that's why the U.S. Army invaded Grenada and led to the murder of Maurice Bishop and the murder of many of his Central Committee. And so this is the island that my people are from. This is the place where if you say, Maurice Bishop, You have people who are alive right now who are part of that revolution and see it very finely. But it didn't work. It didn't go beyond Maurice Bishop because there wasn't a real strategy to really build the capacity of the people to really move the struggle beyond, the charisma of Maurice Bishop. And that's not a criticism of sorts, but it is to say that when we're talking about the revolution and building up, what we have to do as African people, that we have to look at this whole question of doing political education and instilling in every African person that the struggle doesn't end with any charismatic leadership, but that it begins with us. Every single one of us who are part of this struggle has a responsibility to continue the revolution, has a responsibility to build on every single front, and never let U.S. imperialism win. And so I'm the president of the African National Women's Organization, and this is a really critical question because initially when I was asked to take on this work, I was just like, why are we pulling out this women's question? And I just really didn't understand it to the way that I understand it now. Because although I'm an African woman, I've been a part of the African nation. So I see like the stuff that's happening to African people or just like it's happening to African people. I was really concerned about, the IMF and the World Bank and the parasitic capitalism and why everywhere that we look around the world, African people are in like despair. It's not because we're lazy. I've seen African people on the continent, African people in the Caribbean, African people work their asses off from sun up to sundown just to do the basic things to get things done. When I was in Sierra Leone, we had people who woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning just to get water to put in the toilet that they may have in their house. Get buckets that children start their day at 4 o'clock before they even go to school. They get the fires burning. They have to get everything done before nightfall because when nightfall, there's no electricity in the place. So they have to make sure they can see everything. People eat food, whatever, and there's nothing, and it's really dangerous after dark because there's trenches on the side of the street. You can't really do much of anything. And most of the day is just doing the business, doing basic stuff. And it's so much work just to get this basic stuff done there. And so it's not because African people are lazy or that we don't want better for ourselves. We have to look at the worldwide system that continues to oppress these areas. So in the favelas of Brazil, in the barrios of Puerto Rico, in the ghettos of Jamaica, and all of these places in the ghettos of the United States, in the urban areas, wherever we are, and the conditions of African people, the condition that we have to live with is not because as a result of anything that we have not done. When we talk about voting right now, people are saying, "Oh, we have black people who died for your right to be here," and I'm just like, yes, because black people, and just what we were talking about in terms of the lynching museum, black people have died every single place on this planet. There's blood that lines the street, not because we sat back and took it, but because we fought tooth and nail for any inch of freedom that was taken away from us when U.S. imperialism, when Europe attacked Africa, stole our ancestors, used our resources for their benefit, and continue to do so to this day, just to get a semblance of any freedom that was taken away from us. And when we talk about African women, it's even deeper. I mean, we don't even think about some of the ways that U.S. imperialism and colonialism impacts the lives of African women. I mean, just a simple monthly thing of having your menstruation period, thing. And you can't even, there are women who are contemplating whether or not they need to go sleep with somebody in order to afford just basic sanitary products just so that they can go ahead and not bleed on themselves. And just really dealing with the whole question of this. This is not because there's no such thing as menstruation pads and sanitary napkins. It's because there is a system in place that serves to continue to keep people in crisis, women in crisis. And so they can't think about revolution because they're trying to solve this immediate problem that comes up every single month, and people are stressing out because of this thing. And so my job is to see how we can help to alleviate those problems and also bring Africans and help contextualize these things that people don't normally contextualize. Why is it that you have to almost, prostitute yourself just to go get a pad when your government is right here and they can let you have this? When they keep all the money that they get from all these places and keep it in their pockets, but the majority of women who are out here just struggling just to go to school or do X, Y, and Z can't do that because you can't provide this simple thing. Or why is it that, we still have a thing called bride price? And why is it that right here in Philadelphia, which is the worst place to be if you're a poor black woman with children, why is it that we are here having to deal with a majority of our black children who are being illegally kidnapped by the state, right? And we have to suffer through this contest with the state. And these women can't even think about revolution because they're too busy trying to figure out how they're going to get their babies back because of poverty. And all the conditions that colonialism imposed, drugs, all of the violence in our communities. And this is the worst place to be. Philadelphia is the worst place to be if you're African woman in this country. In this country, and I think that's really important. We've gone to events here, but we've been maybe in a crowd of 100 people, and we got to every other person just talking about this whole question of arrest CPS, which is a campaign that AMLO does. And almost every other person that we spoke to, if not almost everyone, said they have been touched by the CPS system. Somebody's child has been taken, or somebody's wife, somebody else's child that has been taken by the state. And it causes such a wedge in our community and distrust of each other, and it criminalizes African women. It tears African babies away from their parents. And there's a whole bunch of just destructiveness in our community. And that's just one thing in a sea of so many other things. So my job is a real big one, as you can see. Because there's so many nuances that go with organizing African women, let alone African people. Because we want these same African women who are struggling and crying every single day to capture their children and get them back. These women who are trying to figure out how they're going to get their sanitary napkins. The women who are in prison, we want these same women to be politicized and come into this work. Because there's not going to be any revolution. There's not going to be any end to capitalism and parasitic oppression and colonialism without the struggles of African women, without their leadership, without saying this is what we need. Because if we can, there might be some semblance of that, but it's not going to be a real thing. It's just going to revert back to some old stuff. If African women who are directly impacted by the rapes that are happening all over the world, by the question of sanitary napkins, by bride prices and all this other type of stuff, children being taken, whether it's by the state here in the United States or adoption, or if they have to move themselves from one place to another because they're running from the military aggression, these are the types of things that African women are confronted with on a day-to-day basis. And we're going to win it, though. We're going to win it. Because we see that African women are organizers. Even in these conditions, African women are dealing with organizing themselves to get from one place to the other. They're organizing themselves, even if it might mean sleeping with somebody, to get what they need in order to function as human beings in this world. They're organizing themselves to combat rape. And African women are organizers. What we have to do at this point, what I have to do, is make sure they have African internationalism. Because this is not something that they have to contend with by themselves. That there are African people around the world who are by their side, by our side, so that we can win against this, this beast of imperialism, which is dying, by the way. And we see it lashing out all over the world, just fighting for survival with AFRICOM in Africa, right? And the leftist parties of Europe, the right and the leftist parties of Europe, and the so-called fascism that's reemerging all over the world. But they're meeting a wall of African and other colonized people who saying, not here, sir. Not here, not no more, not one more time are we going to allow for these people, this capitalism, this colonialism to really impact the way that we are able to be free and live in this world. And I just think that it's significant, the work that we have to do, not only as the entire Uhuru movement, which includes the party, but what you have to do as white people. You have to join this work. You have to be members of USM, because you will have an integral job in supporting the liberation of African people, supporting the liberation of African women and men and any other colonized person in the world. Do the practical work that you are able to bring back to the oppressed people of the world. The time is now, and you need to join Uhuru.